Welcome to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. This is our weekly visit to the crossroads of leadership, communication, and engagement, where we provide captivating conversation while helping you create your compelling company culture. We always get meaningful insights on these topics from fascinating interviews with top business leaders, trendsetters in leadership research, and perceptive commentary from your host, Dr. Dave Miles, myself. And so with that, thank you for joining us today on Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. I am thrilled to have Roxanne Derhodge with the Authentic Connection Movement here today with me. We talk a lot about authentic leadership, and you can't get better as far as talking about authentic leadership than Roxanne as far as the Authentic Connection Network. So a little bit about Roxanne. She's a mental health and wellness expert. She's a registered psychotherapist, corporate consultant, keynote speaker, trainer, and author. And with that, welcome to Conversations on Leadership, Roxanne.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for being here. I wanted to start off with getting you to introduce yourself a little bit better to the listeners and give us a bit of your background.
So I've been a psychotherapist. I started in the field quite young at age 21, and it was something that I decided a long time ago. I figured, I wanted to help people. And that was my perception at age 11. I thought, I wonder if they would pay me to do something like this, which was speaking. And in my traditional kind of high school that I went to, which was an all-girls private school, it was kind of the traditional kind of professions, doctors, lawyers, engineers. And I just knew that that wasn't the fit for me. So decided quite young that I would enter into psychology and started, into university and getting my designation first degree as early as 21, and ended up starting with the Metro Toronto Police here in Toronto.
Nice. Which reminds me, I missed something. I wanted to shout out to our UK listeners because we've got a lot of the listeners from the UK. And I forgot to mention that, yes, Roxanne is coming from a Commonwealth country. And so she is actually in Canada. So, yes, we're tickled to have you. At least, God bless, we got the Zoom that we could talk back and forth to. It's a little bit tougher to do that in person right this second. So,
absolutely. It's going to get better soon, though.
Yes. So what really, I would imagine at 21, it would be interesting to to go through psychotherapy sessions with somebody who would be significantly older. So I'm sure that presented some challenges.
Absolutely. My very first, I still remember my first call. And of course, I was a first line trauma responder with the police, where we would, my team and myself would respond to victims of crime. And I remember the first call, and it's embedded in my brain because, so we drove undercover police cars, which at 21, you think this is cool until you realize where you're going. And it was a suicide call. And I remember my partner, who had been there for a while, said, okay, we're just going to wait till the coroner and the police do their thing, and then we're going to go in. I remember for the first time in my life, I went, oh my goodness, this is very, very real. And that's where kind of my kind of, stepping into real world about people and in this case, pain, what people really need at that point to feel safe and secure, especially when the rest of their world is kind of swirling.
Yes, and from spending years myself on the fire department and EMS and training with the our SWAT team, like I said, it's one thing when you're the lights and sirens sound cool until you realize, like I said, where you're rushing headlong into sometimes. You're like, wait a minute, people run away from this stuff. They don't run towards this. What gives?
I guess we're wired a little bit different, right?
Yeah, on occasion. I was saying that's the truth. So. But the next question I did have for you was, what does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
Well, I think leadership is really connecting to yourself and why am I doing what I'm doing? Whether you're a senior leadership team, or you're leading at home, or even in your community, am I aligned with what I truly believe and value? And are they translating out into actions with the role that I play? And I think the really good leaders that I've come in contact with, and even ones that I interviewed for my book, those are the ones that are really recognizing that they're a whole person, regardless of the role that they're playing at the particular point. So whether I'm at, the hockey rink with my young son, or I'm out in a church in the community, or I'm sitting on a board, or I'm sitting at a senior leadership table, am I being the truest version of myself? And am I in alignment with those values? And what are my top values that I really want to kind of leave behind as a legacy as a leader? And am I acting in accordance with it, you know, on an ongoing basis? And then if I'm deviated off it, what is it that I'm doing to ensure that I kind of recalibrate that trajectory to get back on the right path as a leader?
Nice. Well, that's one of the things that I really have always been a huge fan of. That's one of the things that, you know, seeing your material initially, you know, when you talk about the authentic connection movement is in, you know, when you started talking a lot more about leadership, to me, authentic leadership is just crucial. I don't even feel like I have the proper words for it, because people know when you're fake. People know when you're not coming, when you're not being your true self, when you're coming, it's just the corporate speak. And they, you know, they see the platitudes on the wall, they see the mission, vision, values, they see all the stuff on the wall, but what they see on the wall doesn't match what they see every day in their management team and in their executive leadership. And when you see that disconnect, it is huge when it comes to engagement and retention and all that. It's tough. And so with that, it just blows my mind how important being authentic is, and how sometimes leaders think they have to put on a facade, and how much that's damaging to them and their organization in the long run.
Right, because I think it's one thing to have said in the past that integrity didn't. We know that we all need to have integrity in business, but I think as we've known as leadership consultants, is that now there's no negotiating with it, because in this day and age, people are using their values to interface with companies that they want to be most connected with. And, you know, I know I'm here in Niagara Falls, Ontario, which is just outside of Toronto. And, you know, it's interesting how the kind of the regional strength has showed itself for business since COVID. So before, you wouldn't think twice. And that being said, huge big box stores can still continue, but right. Regionalizing, you know, people are going more to local, because I want to kind of use my money to give it to the consumer that's aligned with where I live, but also not just every local kind of shop, but shops that are in line with what I value as a person.
Yeah, and to me, I think that's very important, because I mean, I'm a huge advocate of supporting small businesses, especially, you know, ones that are in your local community, ones that are there in your chamber, your neighborhood, the ones that sponsor the baseball teams, the ones that, you know, give back to the community, those types of ones. Like I said, a lot of times the big box stores do a lot of good on their own. I mean, a lot of them have charitable foundations, or they have fundraising things that they do, and they try to give back to schools, but it's not quite the same as your local hardware store, your local restaurant, those type of things that really give back. But you're right. It's a lot of, you know, what are the values? And it's nice to be able to support somebody from a consumer end of it that has your values. And it's also great when you're talking about an organization, I think, to be able to actually feel like I can support this leadership team. I can support the vision of the company because the company and the leaders there align with my values as an employee, and you just get that congruence. And I think when you can make that alignment, it just makes for one, a better work environment, but it certainly has some, I believe, bottom line implications on engagement, productivity, turnover. I mean, all of those types of things. When they're happier and feel like they're more, and what they're doing is helping to further the cause. And the cause may be just, I enjoy what I'm doing. It doesn't matter what the cause is, but I think when they can connect with the leadership team in that way, and like I said, and you're not going to do that without being authentic. If you're fake, I think something you said reminded me, for lack of a better term, people's BS have a pretty finely attuned BS meter nowadays. You know, before you could probably get away with, you know, you show up in a suit and tie, you walk in, blah, 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 corporate company meeting, whisk out, and kind of took you at your word. But people now with social media have got, you know, their spidey senses is tingling all the time, you know, and they're pretty good at picking up BS when they hear it. And so I've got to, you know, it's just one of those things that leaders can't get away with anymore.
And I think, you know, the average person now is looking, if I want to work with a new company, um, the average consumer is getting quite savvy, and they're looking
Yes.
into the background of the company prior to, you know, giving them their business. Whereas before, to your point, like when you're in corporate, when the internet was, we didn't have the information that was accessible. Now I can go on to, you know, different platforms. I can go to Google reviews of businesses. I can go on Yelp, wherever I'm going, prior to having that experience. And unfortunately, or fortunately, you can read whether it's been a good or bad experience. And you know, the one thing that I realized when I started to interview authentic leaders is they are congruent, um, regardless of where they are. And this one particular leader shared with me that, you know, he had done very well. He was quite young, and he was kind of, you know, he had a bit of an ego, and he was climbing the ladder, and hadn't really thought of others until he got humbled because the business wasn't doing as well. And then he started to realize, like, okay, I'm young, I'm successful, and I need to recognize that, you know, in order to have people come along with me, whether I'm successful or not, in that space of adversity, he really started to reflect on what is it that I need to do different, because I need people to know I care about you. Yeah, I'm young, maybe I'm a little bit ego driven at this point, but I'm a good person. And in that, you know, kind of sitting with himself, he started to realize that he needed to let people know that his human capital was the most important thing for his business. At the end of the day, he had a product, but he started to do certain things that made people know that they were really cared for. So one thing that he did was he would oftentimes fly first class as his team flew economy. And what he
On
started
the
to
same
do
plane?
on the same plane. So not even
Oh,
thinking that through. And then he started to recognize, as he would kind of walk past his team, that not thinking of it when prior to that, like, this isn't feeling so good. So again, going back to that gut kind of space to start to realize, like, whoa, what am I doing here? Like the cues have been there for me. What is it that I could do differently? And what he started to do was he started to go back in economy and fly with his team until they started to do better, all of them. And then he put everybody into first class eventually. So I think you have to think, how am I living my life? You know, if I'm being judged as the leader or the senior team, in certain, why am I being judged? Is it that the like you said, the placards on the, you know, the mission, the vision, the values, am I living them, or am I expecting that I live different values, but everybody else at every level down from me all the way to the front line, who's frontward facing to the consumer, what values are we hoping that they purport? And is it out of alignment, or is it in alignment? Because really, I think it's top down, bottom up. Because if you're not communicating and demonstrating, it's one thing to communicate, but, and we know communication in line with consistency equals safety. And when people are psychologically safe, they're more productive, they're more engaged, they're less, people don't need companies, they leave people, right? And that's a known fact. So that you're really, and working on yourself as a leader, what you're doing is you're protecting that bottom line. So like I talk a lot about ROR, which is in my new book, ROR, which is return on relationships versus return on investment. So if you focus on those values and how you're demonstrating that on the top level, it all flows down all the way to the front line, and then in turn your customers out there.
no, I agree with you 100%, because if you, like I said, if you're not creating that psychological safety, like I said, if you're not giving them that room for engagement, or like, and it's not just the consumer end of it, and it's not just the people that are working for you currently, but even when new employees are looking to come in, they're looking at you on Glassdoor, not just on Yelp, or, I mean, they're looking at, and they see who the people are running the organization. It's so easy now to go on LinkedIn and see, okay, well, let me check this person out. Let me look at all these different platforms and let me really do my due diligence and research. And it's, yeah, it can be scary. I am laughing though, that it's just the optics of I'm going to be up front in first class and everybody else is in the back, and
you know,
having
it
to
would be
walk
a
past
basic
them. I
thing.
mean, it just on his face that just kind of struck me. So, well, we've got a couple other questions that we're going to get to when we get back from our break. So right now we're going to go ahead and take our first break here on Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, and we will be back right after this. All right, welcome back to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. Today, we are thrilled to have Roxanne Derhodge with us with the Authentic Movement, and we've been talking about authentic leadership, some good examples and some bad examples. We were talking about one particularly interesting example at the end of our first segment. But with that, I did what you had mentioned about people leaving. As we all know, people leave people don't leave organizations. And that's an adage that I know John Maxwell has used for ages. A lot of other authors, a lot of other leadership experts has used. But we were talking about this beforehand, and it was nice to be able to pull data from an old adage. That's all. So just the gee whiz part of me is like, well, let's pull some data. Well, Gallup in their employee engagement on the rise survey in 2018 noted that 70% of the variance in team engagement for their employees is explained by the quality of the manager or the quality of the team leader. So that's
makes so much sense, doesn't it? Absolutely, because I'm going to think twice about potentially leaving an organization if I feel very connected. So let's say I have opportunities and my capacity could be used elsewhere. Maybe I'm getting a 20% kind of bump in my salary, those types of things. If all the other variables aren't in line, I'm not just going to leave for money. But if I am having difficulties, if my issues have not been addressed, if there's been unevenness or conflicts that have not been resolved, or there's a bit of nepotism that perpetuates that team, I'm going to be thinking twice about it, because now I'm thinking, okay, it's a win-win. Whereas, maybe I've checked out the other company, maybe I've been able to talk to one or two people on the team that I'll be joining potentially. And I'm going to say, wow, so you're telling me this is how things are done. So I think that absolutely makes sense. I even think of my tenure with different organizations that I've worked with in corporates. And my decisions were not based on money, and I know that a lot of people say, oh yeah, you leave an organization because you're going to make that much more. Mine were often based on who am I going to work with? What are the traits or qualities in that person that I need to report to? Who's on my team? And kind of in the industry that I was at the particular point, what are their true, not the written values that we put up on the wall, but how are they congruent with what I needed as an executive to join their team? And so those are some of the things. And I've left organizations because I thought they were in line and they sold me a certain thing. And, we all do really, really good at interviews, right? 45 minutes, we can knock it out of the park. You go into the organization, they say exactly what you need to say, and then you sign the deal. And then within 6 months, you're like, my goodness, what did I miss? And then I've left organizations because that's happened too. So I've never left because of more money. It's always been because it's been a misalignment of things, or the company was going in a direction that was out of alignment. And I felt like I was out of integrity based on the choices I had made in joining the company.
Yeah, it's amazing how many times there's that mismatch on the job fit. And you talk about to belabor the point on that Gallup survey, I think it's funny that it really broke it down to 70% of the variation in engagement. And we know how much employee engagement is tied to productivity and retention and all. And I mean, they even go back in the same study and talk about basically 34% of the U.S. workers are actively engaged. They're really into their job. They're really enjoying it. But 53% are not engaged at all. They're just I punch the clock. All right, whatever. I get my check. And then 13% are actively disengaged. And those are like your bomb throwers, man. Those are the ones that actively just, they're the ones causing issues all the time. So, I mean, you still leave 66% of your workforce that is either not engaged or actively disengaged. And 70% of that is coming from a poor leader. And it's just sometimes a simple fact of coming through with that authenticity, being real, and just not putting on the company show and just say, hey, I don't know, or I can't answer that, or I'll find out, or just, and you're right, organizational culture isn't what's plastered on the wall. It's what you allow and what you let people get away with, and what do you allow to occur in your company. And this is our culture is this, and we value this and value that. Well, if what you say on the wall is different than what you're doing, yet again, being inauthentic, maybe just more in a corporate way than because we allow this to happen and we look the other way instead of actively dealing with it. There's a way that the company itself in their actions are being more inauthentic than, just one specific leader. And they create a culture that's, like you said, completely antithetical to what they're putting out. So when you come in as a new employee, like you mentioned, as an executive, and they're telling you everything you need to hear to come there, and you're telling them everything they want to hear to hire you, that's almost as bad as what I jokingly call the unholy contract. Is now that you've gotten in there and you realize, wait a minute, this stinks. This is not what I signed up for. Then that's when really, like, you behind the scenes sign the papers and you get the unholy contract, which is, I work just hard enough to not get fired and you pay me just enough not to quit. Right. Right.
And that's where you're talking to about 65% of with presenteeism, right? I'm not going to miss work. I'm not going to take those days off, but you're getting 65% of my productivity. Because now, like you said, with that unholy contract, I'm like, I'm not engaged because I'm not motivated. There's not the meaning and purpose that I thought I was buying into. How is my energy based on that? And so I'm going to come and I'm not going to show up at with any of the metrics that you may be tracking for incidental absences, short-term, long-term. I'm going to take the days off, but I'm going to look at my patterns and I'm going to make sure I fly right under the radar. I'm going to give you about 65% of what my potential productivity is and what is the cost to the organization then.
Yeah, so, and that's over half your workforce. That's 53%. They're not bomb throwers, but they're not all into it either. That 53% is just not engaged. I'm a clock puncher and sometimes that's fine, but you're right. You're not getting their full. And it's what you could do as a leader to really ramp that up is amazing. But I did have a quick question for you. In all of your corporate and executive leadership, what was one of the biggest leadership challenges that you've had to face through a corporate experience?
Well, I think when leaders want the truth, but they're afraid to hear the truth. So, what I found sometimes, and I'm not saying this of all leaders, but right. I think most leaders want change, but you go out, you find it, you do the analysis, you get told what the issues are, and they go, nice, all and well and good. Thank you for your time. Because I think it's one thing to say you want to change culture. You ask, consultants or whoever, people like you and I, to go out and find out what's really going on. Then you hear what's going on, and then you go, whoa, this is real. I don't know that I can invest in the strategy because it's not a one and done. Let's do some stress management. Let's do some conflict resolution. Let's do some seminars on work-life balance. It's not plugging that hole, but in fact, you have to look at what systemically is going on. And some leaders, when they get the truth about what's really going on, maybe say it's been, that you've not addressed concerns really well. Maybe that your communication is, less than consistent or ideal. Maybe there has been decisions that when they track back, it kind of looked like there's a bit of favoritism, all those things. Or maybe you have leaders that just aren't good leaders, but you've not been addressing it. That means that there's a lot of potholes that you gotta get through to be able to make change. And when leaders think they want change and they know they want change, I think those are two different things. I'm in it for the long haul. I want to know what's going on. I'm going to invest in strategy that's going to say maybe, with a change strategy around culture. Culture does not just come because you've done a couple of things. It's really, if it's a lack of trust, if it's a lack of, ability to compensate accordingly, not just based on money, leadership ability to connect and communicate and make people feel valuable, that's going to take a long time. And, are you willing to invest the time and the human capital associated with making the changes? And sometimes you have to make difficult decisions that you gotta cut some people and let them go if you really want this. So I that's what I found has been the biggest challenge. Companies say they want it, then you start to tell them what needs to get done. And then they go, oh, well, it's so nice to have met you. Thank you for your time. We will do a couple of days and move along. So I think that is the one thing that I've found the most difficult.
Gotcha. From a corporate and using a personalized analogy, it's almost like saying, hey, how do we got to improve our corporate culture? You come in, you give them some recommendations like, I didn't really want to hear that. It's kind of like going to the physician and saying, hey, I really want to lose some weight. Okay, well, you got to eat right and you got to exercise. I ain't trying to hear that, right? You got to give up this, that, and the other. It's like, yeah.
But I still want to eat my chocolate cake
Right. I
every
still want to
night.
eat my chocolate, and I also want my pint of Haagen-Dazs every evening, and I still want this and I want that, and a 6-pack of beer, and I want I want I still want all the goodies, but I don't want to, and I really don't want to ever have to get off the couch and quit streaming Netflix. But I really like to lose 75 pounds.
Right.
We'd all like stuff, it's not Santa Claus, right? It takes some work to get done. So I love using that kind of analogy, because you're absolutely right. They hear it and they're like, same reaction, same facial expression, same reaction, same that, no, same thing. Like they're not saying it out loud, but you can read it all over their face. The same reaction to like the dietitian or the physician saying, okay, you want to lose 75 pounds? Cool. Here's an exercise program. Here's a diet program. Have at it. And you're like, oh, no, that's a lot like work. I'm not trying to hear that. Can I just snap my fingers and just fall off? No, that's not how this works.
But I think the vulnerability elements, right? To really look at it for what it is, and to maybe it's a legacy, maybe you've inherited it. Maybe some of it is your legacy, but I think the true leadership teams and CEOs that want to make a difference are willing to be vulnerable and to accept the data accordingly and recognize that it's going to take time, and it starts with them, and consistency flows down. And if you can't have those brave, courageous conversations to admit what has happened, and to take some responsibility, whether it's legacy before you or you yourself, you have to be willing to stand up and take the hits and say, so this is what I've done, this is what I found out, and this is what I'm willing to do, and to stick with that and stick with the plan, so that people will eventually, with time, start to recognize that there is consistency in your actions.
Absolutely. We got a little bit over 2 minutes left here, but real quickly, what do you see, and kind of tagging on to what we've been talking about, what do you see as one of the biggest mistakes leaders make today?
I think, other than not addressing concerns, I think working on themselves and really ensuring that they're the most resilient possible. Because I think truly most people, Dave, want to be great leaders. I would say there would be a small subset of people that would, get into leadership positions that don't want to. But there's a lot of pressures on leaders today. And I think there's a lot of expectations of them. So I often say it's kind of like the analogy with the plane going down. Are you willing to put the oxygen mask on yourself first and work on yourself and really, really stay optimally functioning as an individual who happens to be the senior leader, so that you can stay clear on your vision and your values, and to recognize how you respond under stress, and what are people needing from around you, so that you can be congruent. I think if you can do that introspection and awareness, which I think is one of the biggest qualities that leaders need to invest in, I think that's something that's most valuable.
Yeah, it is amazing the scientific studies that are coming out, but just in general, the effectiveness of 3 things: self-awareness, mindfulness, and working with the mindset, and then their physical activity. It's all 3 of those really go well together. I mean, because obviously you could be as self-aware as you want, but if your mind can't clear itself and be kind of focused and really stay on task, I mean, you can obviously go off target with that really bad. And keeping that tight mindset, but also same thing, if your physical condition is not where it needs to be, that really puts a lot of stress on leaders. And you're right, there's a lot of demands, and so a lot of times they're like, well, I'm working 50, 60 hours a week, I don't have time, I don't have. And the bad part about those things, whether it's self-awareness, whether it's mindfulness, and keeping your mind where it should be and focused, and the physical activity, you just have to make time for that. You just got to put it in there. You're like, okay, I'm not, it's like sharpening the saw with Covey's book. It's like, I've got to carve this time out to do this, or eventually I'm not going to be as effective as I need to be, and obviously not going to be able to move up or do anything from there. So that is all the time we have for this segment. So we're going to go to break, and we're going to come back with Roxanne on Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave here on KLDR Online Radio. See you in a bit. All right, welcome back. Welcome back. We are here with Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, and our guest today is Roxanne Derhodge with the Authentic Movement, and I'm thrilled to have our last segment here. We've got a couple extra questions, and then it's a matter of tell us how we can kind of connect with you and get in touch with you. But I wanted to start out, we had talked a little bit about culture and engagement. The biggest thing about authenticity with leadership and not just specific leaders, and how important that is with, like you said, the Gallup saying that 70% of the variability and engagement for a team is from that team manager, that team leader, but also a company being authentic and true to its values, and what's on the wall is actually what they do, God forbid. I mean, that would be ridiculous to think that, but it does help. I do laugh because it was one of you were talking about engagement last time, and I thought of an example, and I didn't have time in the last segment, but I remember a particular hospital system that my wife used to work for, and they had very, let's just say, to put it nicely, a very poor set of scores on their employee engagement survey one year. Is that a nice way to put it?
Yes,
it wasn't as robust as they would like it, the scores they'd like it to be. So you had mentioned about people not really wanting to hear, like, yeah, that's nice, Roxanne. Yeah, we're just going to do like a little one-day thing, and we're not going to put the time in. This one was awesome. I thought this was amazingly wonderful, because I'm like, I've seen some reactions like you described. Hadn't seen this one too much. It's like, well, we really don't like the scores, so we don't think you asked the right question. So we're going to go and get another consulting firm to do a different employee engagement survey with completely different questions, so we get better results. And they kept changing for a couple of years.
Nothing like trying to skew the data, because
they would never do that. Right? It's ridiculous, Roxanne. What are you talking about? But yes, they kept getting new consultants to bring in new surveys with different questions and change the questions to get better results. And I'm like, man, this is I got a kick out of it, because I'm like, if this isn't the system working against itself, because it's great because of the way the healthcare system in America is trying to get that hospitals to get that employee engagement surveys, to find out how their nurses and their staff and their physicians and how everybody, it's great that they're doing that. But you're right, when I made a series of videos a while back, and I probably should redo them again, as far as talking about employee engagement season. I had done a series called 5 Ways to Raise Your Employee Engagement Scores. And that raise was like, the tearing. I was like, five ways to really screw this up, and one of them was change the questions. You don't like what you hear, change the questions. And I got that specifically from them. And I joke about employee engagement season, right? You don't hear about employee engagement except for the 30 days before the assessment. And then there's this like crickets and tumbleweeds while they're waiting on the results. And then everything come back great. We got 1 or 2 little points we're going to go with it. But now it might be a nuclear meltdown in the boardroom, right? But the forward facing is, oh my God, it was wonderful. But I wanted to ask you though, what do you think on that note is really the best ways for leaders to improve their leadership skills?
I think it's to assess what their leadership skills are. So what I often do with companies is like, I want to get a benchmark about what is your communication style, how do you make decisions, how aware are you, to kind of get a metric of all those particular areas, right? So people will say to me as leaders, how am I going to find that out if nobody's going to tell me at work? I say, well, go to your youngest child, and and then start to ask people that are, you have, maybe a mentor, maybe you have business colleagues, that you can reach out to and say, what would you, can you give me some feedback? Because what you want is objective feedback. And if there's ways that you can gain that feedback within your company, get it, and try to understand, like, when I lead well, what do I do really, really well? And when I'm not leading so well, what is it that I'm not, what is it that's kind of bothering you about my leadership style? And I think that's a beginning point, because that kind of, with my book, what I've done is that once a company is ready as can be to make change, the leader he assesses his or her own skill, and the team does the same for the leader. And then they all go through things from communication, awareness, balance processing, which is basically, how they make decisions, how they manage their stress, and recognition, all those things. And as they go through the modules of the training, the team is consistently kind of gauging the metric to see how they're doing. So I think you got to figure out, we all have really, really good things that we are as leaders, but there's areas that we're always needing to enhance. So having a true bench of where you are as a leader, and, kind of trying to think about, when I'm leading in the way that feels good for me, what am I doing well? And we know when we're not leading well. Yeah. So, and to really have that honest conversation by some of the information that you're going to get from others, but also within yourself. What is it that you need to improve? And that begins the steps that you can take, right? So whether, there's so many different ways you can do it. You can work with a business coach individually to start to kind of work on some of those concerns.
No, I really like the idea of two things. One, it's some, to a certain degree, self-report assessment data. There's a lot of ones that are out there that are great. There's a lot of them that are good for what they are. And then there's a lot of them that have some really hard science behind them. And I would recommend doing your research and really get ones that not just are maybe the most popular, but also get ones that, look at the science and the data behind them and make sure that the results that you're going to get are valid and reliable. But you had mentioned, for lack of a better term, it's a 360 surveys. I love the idea of, here's where I'm at and here's what I think, but what does everybody else think? I remember when I was doing my dissertation research, one of the things that I was measuring was a person's not learning style the way people think, but their level of basically self-directed learning. Their level, it's called autonomous learning, but basically their level of being able to learn and really be self-directed in the way they learn, and if it made an effect on their leadership effectiveness. Mm-hmm. Now, the funny part is, yes, I had a survey that all the leaders took. They took the one for the self-directed learning end of it, find out what their level of self-directedness was in their learning style. Great. Awesome. Okay. That's pretty self-explanatory. Then they took one that gave a level of their leadership effectiveness. But that was not the data I was going to use for the dissertation. I did a 360 on that one. And what I did is, for all the leaders, I had, members of their team that reported to them. And I used the level of leadership effectiveness when I was comparing the two for what their people said, how effective they were, not how effective they thought they were. Right. And the interesting part, and I think it's kind of ties into this a little bit as far as the self-awareness part, I almost, thank God I didn't, almost went down this rabbit hole when I started looking at the research. And it was fascinating, was the rabbit hole of the difference between the way somebody assessed their own, quote, leadership effectiveness, and how everybody else that reported them, they're all 360 of them, reported their leadership effectiveness. And it was amazing to look at, okay, this person is super self-aware because it is right on point. What they're saying is what everybody else is saying within a little bit. Awesome. They're right into it. There was a subset of folks that they rated themselves lower than a lot of times what everybody else said. And then there was a subset that rated themselves significantly higher than what everybody else said. And it was funny because, it was that gap. You might have somebody that rates themselves lower, a little bit of coaching, they found, really kind of got them to the place where, no, people really think you're much better than what you think you are. And why do you think that? Here's why, just small little bit of work. The biggest issues they had were the ones that, hey, I think I'm all that, right? I'm the best thing since sliced bread and the second coming, right? I am it. And then your folks are like, yeah, no, not so much. that I could have spent a lot of time on that, but I'm like, nah, I want to get this thing done, right? I can't deal with this. I've got the data. I can worry about it some other time. But man, it was interesting to look at the difference between, ooh, there's a big gap, man. You need some help, right? That's, you think you're here and everybody else thinks not so much, right? So that was just an interesting finding, I thought. But I love your idea about getting that 360 feedback. And even just if you do get the 360 feedback, looking at that gap on your own and saying, you know, where am I at? Am I at the point that I think I'm great and everyone else that's working for me is like, you stink? Or am I pretty right on point? Or maybe I'm thinking of myself a little bit less than really I should. Right. And, you know, then that goes to your self-confidence, your self-image, you know, where you think you're at and what you're doing. And, you know, like I said, it's very interesting. I think if leaders can really, if they do decide to get some 360 feedback, if there's a way to look at that gap, that's an important gap to take a look at after you look at where everybody else has rated you. And then, like I said, be able to put some things into place to really be able to either close that gap or really improve where you're at.
Right. And for sure. And that variance between your team members and what they need to be connected for you to lead in a certain way, right? Like, because of course, some people said, just leave me alone, give me the numbers, I can do it. Other people need to know that you need to connect with them. So you have all those variables, which I know you do a lot of assessments with individuals and teams and stuff like that as well. So those variables come in as well too, right? With what are people needing to feel connected to you as a leader? But the overarching sense is, you know, how am I connecting based on what when people are presenting to me a bit differently, how am I able to engage them in a way that works for them? Now, it's not about me, but it's about me reading, you know, that person on my team, in my radius, on my business unit, that's maybe a little bit different from me, but how am I reading that and adjusting my style so I can, you know, meet the needs of maybe a team that's a bit different. So.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the crucial things I love to deal with teams is if you are a manager, you're an executive, and you cannot just be that self-aware of, hey, here's my communication style and really how I think and how I process information and how I do things. But you're right. If you know for all your direct reports how they are, it truly is beyond a golden rule thing. I mean, we talk about the golden rule is in it, and I believe it was John Maxwell had done some research. In fact, that was like the one thing that across philosophies and across different religions, it was almost consistent across just about every single one, that whole golden rule concept, you know, but if I'm communicating with you how I want to be communicated with, okay, I might want you to just pop in my office, vomit 3 bullet points on my desk, you know, tell me the facts, boom, 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 and out the door. And there's folks that's just not going to work with. And you're right. If you can actually know how, but it's more of a, I call it platinum rule thing. I mean, I'm communicating with my direct reports in the way that they would like to be communicated with and not being inauthentic, still being real, but being intentional about meeting them halfway, I think is extraordinarily powerful for engagement, retention, and just overall, I enjoy working here. And this is, you know, I enjoy working with my team. So you're absolutely right. I think that's a big one, but I got about 3 minutes left in the show. And I really want to find out how listeners can connect with you. Tell us maybe a little bit about your book, your site, programs, whatever. Let's say, I don't know, kind of the last 3 minutes that we have. How can they connect with you?
So they can reach me at roxannederhodge.com. So I've written 2 books. The first book is Therapist Insider Guides on Relationships. So if they're interested in just enhancing all relationships, that's a book that's available. But a new one is coming out in the fall, and it's more to do with leaders and their teams. And it's Return on Relationships and how authentic leaders can enhance resilience on their teams, and the ROI takes care of itself. So that's coming out relatively soon. So if you're wanting to connect with me, you can reach me on any platform. I hang out a fair amount on LinkedIn, and I'm available there to be able to consult and see what needs you might have. I do keynote speaking as well. So I'm always interested in, you know, hearing if there's a need out there for keynotes around authentic leadership or resilience.
I love the concept of your new book, The Return on Relationship, as far as in the context of being an authentic leader, because you're absolutely right. All the things we talked about today, whether it's your leadership style, whether it's, how you communicate your behavioral style and that of your team, the differences, the gaps, the organizational culture, all that boils down to that concept that you're talking about in your book. It's all about relationships. It's all about people. No matter what business you're in the people business. Mm-hmm. And to be able to take that and be able to, like you said, get not just a return on my investment as far as money wise, but people don't realize how much money walks out the door every time you're not capitalizing and building those relationships. And people are like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm going. And that 70% of that variability, and you've got poor leaders and you got people walking out the door, that return on relationship, you're absolutely right. The ROI starts taking care of itself because, hey, I'm treating my people right. I'm authentic. I'm pouring into them. I'm being more people-centric. And guess what? They're staying. They're being more productive. They're more engaged. Like I said, God forbid, the money, the bottom line is really starting to look a little bit better because I'm not being an opera singer in all this. It's not about me. It's all about, about everybody else. And what can I do to help them meet their goals? Mm-hmm. And when you do that, like I said, a lot of the business part of it takes care of itself. So that is awesome. Awesome. And I remember as far as podcasts go, listening to one recently from a pretty popular podcast, a guy named Andy Frisella, and he has a supplement business and major player in the industry now. But that was his big turnaround, was exactly what you just said. When it was all about him and them making money and them growing and then whatever, to what do I got to do to, help my customers and make their life better and make my employees' lives better and really pour into that. And the return, he focused more on the relationships, just like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, he's never read your book, but his experience went right along with, and now he's, very successful as a business owner. And it's really cool to kind of see those principles have played out over time and you be able to consolidate that in a book. So definitely check out Roxanne's new book, Return on Relationship. I'm assuming you can find it on Amazon.
Yes, you will be able to once it's released. And you can just go to roxannederhodge.com and there will be a drop down for the new book.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's roxannederhodge.com, RoxanneDerhodge for our radio show listeners. So roxannederhodge.com. And for all of our listeners too, I want to thank you again for listening to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave here on KLDR Online Radio. For all of our listeners, we do have something that we're going to start doing every single week. So if you text the letters COL for Conversations on Leadership, COL to 540-900-0450. That's COL to 540-900-0450. And for all of our UK folks and Canadian folks, the international code is +1. So please make sure and dial that when you're texting. And you'll get two things. You'll get a copy of the Gaining Insights into Your Team presentation. And we had highlighted that on our show a week or so back. Also, wanted to make sure that you guys got a assessment. We talked about communication style, quick, free, maybe 10 minutes communication assessment. Gets your primary style, how to better communicate with others not like you, and then tips on working remotely based on your communication style. So like I said, text COL to 540-900-0450 to get that. And with that, we will see you next time on Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. Thanks so much, Roxanne.
Thank you.